Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbinic Intern, Adrian Marcos.
Today we're going to be talking about the Parsha that we kind of just read. We only read the first three aliyot. The real meat and potatoes, in my opinion, of that Parsha comes in what we're going to be studying. And the title is, both true and my opinion. It's talking about Esav losing his birthright. And it's more than just losing, property or brachot or things like that. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a discussion about the birthright and its relation to Torah. Let's get started. Does anybody want to read the first source, the first chunk? Wow. Don't bow me over. Okay. Yep.
Pass me a mic so people on the live can hear me. Thanks. I was a little hesitant so I could give someone else a chance first, but nobody. Okay. Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I'm at the point of death. So of what use is my birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright.
Awesome. Thank you, Joey. So, a lot happens in these four verses, all very sudden. And then it does this little thing at the very end that says, "Thus did Esau spurn the birthright." Rashbam translates it a little bit differently in the next source. And for those unfamiliar with Rashbam, Rashbam is the grandson of the great Rashi. Most Chumash, traditional Chumashim, if they have commentators, will usually have Rashi, and sometimes they'll include Rashbam. And Rashbam's approach to the text is very different than Rashi's. Rashi likes to pull from Midrash to back up what he's saying, and Rashbam likes to be essentially, my grandfather is wrong, and I'm going to show you why he's wrong, and this is the real meaning, the real, true meat and potatoes of the text. So does anybody want to read the second source? Okay, Josh does.
Hine ani holech lamut. I'm going. Hine anochi holech lamut. I'm going into the forest day after day to hunt in an area full of bears. Lions, and other ferocious beasts, and I'm risking my life on a daily basis. What point would there be in my waiting until our father dies and I get my share of the birthright? This is the way my father, Rabbi Meir, interpreted Esau's last words in this verse. This is the meaning of Esau despised the birthright.
Gary and Marlies, could you please mute? So, this is Rashbam's commentary on the verse, and then, he kind of jumps around with this particular comment. And his translation is a little harsher than the translation that I pulled for the very last verse in the first source. The last source says, Esau spurned it being the birthright, and then Rashbam's like, nah, he despised it. Which is to me, it's very interesting, because if we jump forward a couple of chapters and verses, we'll get to the third source, and we'll see that, I think we're all familiar with the story of this really dramatic confrontation, I guess is the best word to say, between Isaac and Esau once they realize that, Jacob pulled a trick on Isaac, and Esau is just devastated, both by the trick and to learn that his birthright is gone. And he can't really believe that there's nothing left for him now. So who wants to read the third source? You can do it in Hebrew, English, whatever language you're comfortable with. I just need to be able to understand it. Anyone? Mela can do it.
Isaac was seized with very violent trembling. Who was it then, he demanded, that hunted game and brought it to me? Moreover, I ate of it before you came, and I blessed him. Now he must remain blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst into wild and bitter sobbing, and said to his father, Bless me too, father. But he answered, Your brother came with guile and took away your blessing.
Thank you. I have to be by the mic. That's right. Okay. So, as we see, again, Esau is like, this can't be it for me. Like, I want a blessing. I want an inheritance, which seems very different than what we saw in the first source, and it also seems to push back against Rashbam's commentary that Esau despised his birthright. Right? This is we have no idea how old Jacob and Esau are when this story is going down. I tend to imagine them as like in their late teens to early 20s, because I too was impulsive in my late teens, and I think it also just kind of enhances the drama that you have young people who make decisions and they don't think them through, and suddenly they have to face, well, several chapters later in this case, they have to face the consequences of those actions, and it's a kind of consequence that they never could have foreseen. So that brings me to the fourth source, and the background for this source, it's called the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael. The Mechilta is, it's Midrash. This one is specifically on Shemot, which I recognize as a completely different book, and this one is also focusing on a verse in Shemot from the Ten Commandments where God is announcing, I am the Lord your God. But it's still, I feel that it's still relevant because of what's contained within it. Does anybody want to read this source? I feel like I'm flying through this. Brian, okay.
He came and revealed himself to the sons of the wicked Esau and asked them, Will you accept the Torah? They, What is written in it? He, You shall not kill. They, But this is what we have inherited from our father, as it is written, By your sword you shall live.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I have dropped a lot of text on everybody. I recognize that. Does anybody have any questions thus far before I really start kind of digging in with a shovel? Mela does, okay.
My question is about, you made a comment about it being around him being, like, Esau being young, but I also think it's because he was on his deathbed. Like, if you're about to die, you'd also make different decisions than if you're not, right? Like, I think that also plays a part. And so I was just curious your thoughts on, like, those two pieces together.
I know the language that Esau uses is like, Hine anochi holech lamut, like, here I am at the point of death, but I've always taken that as like an exaggeration. Again, because I'm picturing him young and like the dynamic between brothers or siblings, really. And, it could be that he thinks that Jacob's demand, sell me your birthright and I'll give you the stew, is like ridiculous. Like, there's no way, right? Okay, fine. Like, I'm on the verge of death. What good does, like, at this point in time, the birthright is an abstraction. It's not something real or tangible to Esau. Jacob clearly considers it more, otherwise he wouldn't be asking for it. Although I hear your comment, and I do read Rashbam's comment. And it could be that Esav was, he'd been hunting for so long that he just didn't have the physical strength. And in that time period, physical strength, especially if you were a hunter, meant a lot. And if you didn't have it, then you kind of lost your utility. So does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, I guess it makes the Rashbam a little bit more clear that, like, in my head, he's just risking his day of your life and just focusing on the present, whereas Jacob is focusing on the future too.
Yes.
Right. Like they're in different moments of time, which I think plays into both points a little bit.
That is actually a great point. Did you read the sheet ahead of me? I'm kidding. Yes, the gentleman next to Josh.
I need the microphone. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so this is fascinating to me because what I'm taking from it is that that normally when we inherit, we're thinking of what we materially inherit from our parents. Okay, the house, the real estate, but this birthright is an inheritance of a psychological relationship, actually events that are going to occur in your life. It's almost like Isaac is predicting and creating the life that that Jacob and Esau are going to have. So it's that is a point of view that I don't think is a modern point of view, that you inherit your life from your parents. Yes.
People have a legacy, and it can go to their children. That's all. So I think it's something that lives with us today. I beg to differ.
I'm just going to cut the short debate off at the knees because these are all great points, particularly when it came to the physicality. Because if we look at the way that the Mechilta ends, its proof text, it cites actually the fifth source, which is Isaac's blessing to Esau, the kind of quote-unquote make-up blessing. And the response of the descendants of Esau say, well, we can't inherit Torah because our inheritance was that we're going to live by our sword. And a sword is a much more, clearly, it's a physical item. You can do a lot of things with a sword. Torah, on the other hand, yes, we have Sifrei Torah in here. We just read from one. There are Humashim lining the walls. So in that sense, Torah is a physical entity. But it is also kind of an abstract concept. What does it mean to live by Torah? You aren't going to fight someone on the battle, on an actual battlefield with a Torah scroll. I would certainly hope not anyway. We, the Jewish people, are not traditionally a nation of warriors. We don't produce soldiers. Our works are not war manuals. Our works are, Sidurim and commentaries and prayers and Biyutim, all of these literary things that require the engagement of the mind over physical work. And any battles that we are fighting historically have been in the Beit Midrash, which is a very different kind of battlefield. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone want to read the fifth source?
Does it actually say it says thou shalt not murder? Isn't that what it says? It doesn't say thou shalt not kill. Isn't there a difference between murder and killing? And don't we now have the strongest military in the Middle East?
It is true. And that Titzcha is murder. The way that this was translated, does say you shall not kill, which is how a lot of people have understood it. Whether it is kill or murder in this context, it still shows a difference in Bnei Israel and Bnei Esav. We have understood the Jewish people to be kind of like a guiding light towards other nations. You don't need to focus entirely on military works. Like, you should probably be more focused on helping your neighbor or your community, or like studying Torah. And because, Esav sold his birthright, whether he spurned it, like he like waved it away, it was like whatever, or he like outright hated it, he made a decision, and in that moment he lost the birthright. And what his descendants inherited were swords. Jacob's descendants, we are Bnei Israel. What we inherited was Torah, which is a completely different world than that of the sword. So, yeah.
I was just looking at the first source again, and I found it really interesting at the very end where Esav actually accepts the deal, because the verbs that are used in Hebrew are very like one after another. He does all these actions in quick succession. Vayechol, vayesht, vayakam, vayelech, vayivez Esav et bechorah. He's so caught up in the moment of getting this stew and making a short-term deal with his brother. He does all the actions and immediately spurns the birthright. He doesn't take any time to think about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting how much that's reflected elsewhere in his personality, that he makes this very rash, abrupt decision and then spends a while crying about it. But it's also very fitting with his warlike kind of macho personality that's described all over the commentary and the Midrash. But I just found the way the text describes that very interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think also speaks to the differences in a sword versus Torah, because Torah, as we know, is everlasting. There is no beginning, there is no end, there is only Torah, however you want to parse that. Whereas a sword, it has a beginning, you make it, and it has an end. It breaks or it gets dull, and you can only sharpen a sword so many times before the metal becomes so thin you can't really use it anymore. So not only did these verbs are very in the moment, they are very quick, as you noted. They're also very brief things. I had a cup of coffee because that's the kind of person I am. And I've already finished it. This cup of coffee did not last forever. No cup of coffee should, to be honest. And then he ate. That happens very well. He seems to have done it very quickly, but I think for those of us who have empty plates, we know we can eat relatively quickly. They're all things that have to be enjoyed in the here and now, and you can't take it with you in the next life or Olam Haba or however you want, however you want to see that. We understand Olam Haba is, well, to me, it's eternal Torah study. So, yes, Rabbi Cliff.
Question. Oh, go ahead. What is the root of the word Bechorah? Bechorah, it means birthright, right? What is that, the etymology of that?
Do you want me to answer?
Are you asking for the shoresh, or?
Yeah, well, where does that word stem from? I mean, what does it really mean?
It means first. It means firstborn, primogeniture, the first things, the choice, either the first in order or the first in significance.
I think it's used for fruits.
Yeah, Bikor. Yeah.
So this birthright is kind of it's not an exact translation.
It's the portion of his father's spiritual or financial inheritance that would have specifically gone to the firstborn. I was going to add on to what Josh said before. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the only time in Torah where you have 5 verbs in a row, and particularly 5 verbs in a row with the same subject and no object. So the staccato nature of Vayochal, Vayesh, Vayakom, Vayelech, Vayives is not just interesting. I think it's unique, and the trup is interesting too because if you read the 5 verbs in a row, you could suggest that each of these verbs is its own individual action that he did hurriedly. He ate hurriedly, he drank hurriedly, he got up hurriedly, he went hurriedly, and he spurned hurriedly, right, by Yves. Or the trup puts an etnachta, a pause after the 4th one, to suggest Vayochal, Vayesh, Vayakom, Vayelech, pause. He did those 4 things, and because he did those 4 things so hurriedly, what that meant was a spurning of his birthright. That it's impossible to take what is given to you properly and seriously if you're going to rush through everything. That the result of the rushing, of the eating, of the doing without thinking was, of course, you're going to spurn, you're going to surrender all the things that are important to you.
Yes. And bouncing off of that, I mean, that also speaks to how in the how this world focused, if that, I think that's proper English, how really Esau was just focusing on what he could do in this life. He clearly was not thinking ahead. Jacob was seeing it. He was emulating his father and his grandfather. These were people who they had a longer vision, a longer game that they wanted to partake in, and that game was Torah, which brings us, here in this room. Yeah. Yes, give me 1 sec.
I just have to wonder what Esau, what was his mental, where was he coming from, so to speak? Esau, that he was at the point of death. Here this is a person who lives by hunting, by living, by being in the outdoors. So something's going on more. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind of emotional, mental, spiritual, some kind of incapacity there that brought him to that point. And that's something I would want to think about.
Yeah, it's very possible, especially if taking Rashbam's comment and having that in mind, is that Esau was hunting for days and just didn't have a successful hunt. He wasn't able to bring anything with him, and he'd been out there for so long that he worked through the provisions, the supplies that he had, which brought him to that, weakened, maybe exaggerated, maybe not, but either way, he was at a state where he's like, I am toast unless I have some food in me. And he was willing to trade with Jacob, not thinking things through, and yeah, that's kind of how that ended up.
Just that Esau was a troubled soul. That's all I can say.
The various midrashim seem to agree with that opinion, but I don't, at least in the selection of texts that I have prepared, I don't think that we can really ascribe, a condition to his mental state one way or another, and I'm loath to do that right now. Mela.
I actually have 2 comments. One going off of that what Esau ended up getting from Jacob are things that take a while. Like to make bread, to make stew, take a long time. They're not immediate things compared to his situation, right? So number 1, that. But then number 2, I guess I'm curious, what are we supposed to learn from all of this would be my next question.
I would say to learn from the Parsha itself, or just this, all of, okay. That it was more than just the brachot that Jacob got, and property rights, all of like how we traditionally understand birthrights. And it was more than just like, being doomed to a life where your descendants, or you and your descendants, are ripped apart in the Midrash. In engaging in the here and now and not thinking ahead, Esav also lost his chance at Torah, and his descendants also lost their chance at Torah. This piece from the Mechilta is part of a larger piece, which discusses when the divine, was giving out Torah, and the larger part is the divine went to all of the other nations of the world. He went to the Ammonites, he went to the Edomites, he went to the Ishmaelites, being like, here is Torah, will you accept it? And every single one of these nations was like, well, what's in it? And the divine reads a passage, or it tells them a passage from the Ten Commandments, and their response is like, oh no, we can't, because, either this was in the case of Bnei Esav, this is the inheritance we got from our ancestor, or, our forefathers made some really questionable life choices, and now, we're kind of stuck. And you're right that bread and stew do take a long time to make, having made both. But they require you to slow down as you make them, because if you try to rush bread, it gets upset, and then you end up very sad. Same with stew. If you try to rush things, you can't change the character of the foods that you're I'm jumping to food for a bit because I swear this is going to make sense. You can't change the fundamental nature of how, in the case of bread, of how bread works. If you try, you just end up with sadness and something that's inedible. Or well, look, if you want to eat matzah year-round, that's your choice. But Torah is something that fundamentally changes a person. We see if Esau, the response of Bnei Esav is like, well, this is our inheritance. To me, as I read this, the underlying thing that they're saying is if we accept Torah, not only do we have to reject the inheritance of Esav, but we have to reject what it means to be ourselves. Some people are okay with doing that, and some people just can't. And if you come from something or someone that only knows war, then if that's all you know, changing that overnight is going to shock your system. And if you shock, medically, if you shock your system, that's very bad. Please go to the hospital if you ever end up in that state. But if you can take the sword out of somebody's hand and turn them into a Torah scholar, we see that. But Bnei Esav's people, the Bnei Esav's descendants, couldn't overcome the warlike and impulsive nature of Esav, if that makes sense. The gentleman next to Josh.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm learning is that it's sort of like you get your own, the blessing you deserve. And Esav's nature was, impulsive. And then he got a blessing that he's going to live by the sword, which is kind of saying when I have to solve a problem, I'm just going to react, in an impulsive way and, get angry. If I'm angry, I'm going to, fight, as opposed to I'm going to be thoughtful and think about what is the best solution. So I think what I learned is that we have free will to overcome our nature. And this is kind of, these are like metaphors for the person with an impulsive nature versus a person with a thoughtful nature. And it's like you create your own life. based on how you deal with your nature. That's what I learned from it.
Thank you. That's actually, I think, a great way to end this. Rabbi Clickville, do I have to stop? Am I?
You're getting close.
Okay, we're gonna cut it. We're gonna cut me off at the knees here. Hopefully, y'all enjoyed this learning session. Y'all had great comments and great questions. So, thanks.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.